FNAF is primarily considered to be inspired by the negative reception of Scott Cawthon's previous game, Chipper & Sons. Some even say that the MCI from FNAF, that is the Missing Children's incident, was inspired by a real-life incident at a local pizzeria restaurant, Chuck E. Cheese, but it's still debated to this day whether to be an inspiration or a coincidence. But what if I tell you that there was another source of inspiration coming from a late movie franchise? Well, hold on to your seats, because I think I might have found a big source of inspiration to FNAF, that is, parts of its story and some of its main characters. Now, even if this turns out to be a coincidence, well, then at least it's a really fun coincidence to think about, so please don't go crazy in the comments. This is just a theory. In this video, I'm going to reveal some interesting connections between the FNAF franchise and the Eastrail 177 trilogy, directed by M. Night Shyamalan with its first movie's release in 2000. Just to ensure you, there will be some spoilers. Let's start with the most obvious one, shall we? Mr. Glass and William Afton. First of all, they are both heavily tied to purple, and the reason behind why Mr. Glass wears purple clothes is that the actor Samuel L. Jackson just wanted to wear clothes in his favorite color. We even see him with a purple lightsaber in the Star Wars prequel trilogy, and the reason why Afton is purple in the minigames is because that was a design choice by Scott Cawthon to make Afton visible on screen while still being represented in the shadows. You can't make him completely dark because otherwise he would just blend in with the background and not be visible. At first glance, I thought that this was just another one of those coincidences with antagonists having the same color code. You see, there's another supervillain from a Marvel comic called the Purple Man, so yeah. But besides that Mr. Glass and Afton are both purple and being the antagonists of their own series, this still could have been a fun coincidence that Scott himself found back in 2014 and decided to spin upon and create more similarities later on. And just so, later on in the novels, Afton is now portrayed as a former businessman just as Mr. Glass was in Unbreakable. Elijah Price, which is his real name, is the owner of a shop called Limited Edition. So yeah, now they both have the same type of social status, being portrayed as the main masterminds behind their evil plans, always having this vision of what everyone else sees as supernatural actually being reality. Mr. Glass believes that real superheroes exists and that Afton believes in ghosts and possessions, and they each have a single wheelchair. I know that this could still be a coincidence and it's impossible to know if Scott actually intended to make those fun little connections or not. But then we must look at two more parallels between these two franchises. Let's move over to David Dunn and Mike Schmidt. In Unbreakable, we are introduced to the protagonist David Dunn, who works as a professional security guard. It is revealed that he is the only sole survivor of a fatal train accident and despite the circumstances comes out completely unharmed. Throughout the movie, he discovers that he has superhuman abilities such as a unique extrasensory perception, enabling him to see a person's past misdeeds by touching them, can lift to about 350 pounds, hasn't been sick for a really long time, and that he has survived another accident, that is a car accident, from college. Once again unharmed. He is, just like the movie says, unbreakable. Who is also an unbreakable protagonist from another franchise? Well, Michael Afton, who is theorized to be the same security guard from FNAF 1 with the alias Mike Schmidt. In this location, Mike miraculously comes back to life after being scooped, and just as his sister says, "You won't die," is now unbreakable. But both do have a weakness each, and David discovers that his weakness is water, while Mike Afton's is fire, hinted via the FNAF 6 ending. I will say that there is no big surprise that a superhero or protagonist from one series can survive multiple accidents and have one weakness. This isn't actually strong evidence that we're looking at here, but then we need to look at the clothes that David Dunn is wearing. A green security guard jacket. What does Mike Schmidt wear in the movie franchise? A green shirt, and whether if his security jacket is green or not is hard to tell if you ask me. But you know, both the FNAF movie and the sequels to Unbreakable are all under Blumhouse production, so they might have just reused some elements from previous movies. Although Unbreakable itself was originally produced by Disney. It's only the sequels that were produced by Blumhouse. However, I can still see some parts of David Dunn's character being an inspiration for Michael Afton's character. After David Dunn finds out that he has superhuman abilities, he goes on to save a family that has been kidnapped by a maintenance man. He successfully follows the garbage man in the shallows unnoticed and is able to free the family from the criminal. Now, Michael Afton, at least in this location, reveals that he has been living in the shadows to catch his evil dad.
I've been living in shadows. I'm going to come find you.
a potential parallel to Dunn, who I just explained hides in the shadows in order to save lives. Also, at the end of Unbreakable's thematic sequel Split, we see the reveal of David Dunn re-entering this franchise and story years later, just as Mike does in FNAF. David Dunn shows up at the end of Split 16 years after the events of Unbreakable, also 16 years after the movie's release itself, since the movies takes place the same year they're released. Michael Afton also returns decades later to fight off his arch-nemesis Mr. Afton. Mr. Afton, Mr. Glass, yeah, the parallels are right there. Funnily enough, the FNAF movie is set in the year 2000, just as Unbreakable is. So is this another connection between the two franchises? Well, maybe. But it doesn't mean that the FNAF 3 movie will be set 16 years later in 2016, just as it was in Unbreakable sequel Split. Speaking of Split, however, there is one final parallel between two characters: the Horde and the Mimic. I know that this might sound as a stretch, but this one did hit me a lot as I looked into it. In Split, we're introduced to a new villain, Kevin Wendell Crumb, aka the Horde, who suffers from a split personality disorder caused by the results of being abused by his mother during childhood. He goes on to take the roles of 24 different personalities, everything from Miss Patricia to a child named Hedwig, and at last but definitely not least, the Beast. In the story, the Horde as Dennis abducts 3 girls who had just attended a birthday party and keeps them in an underground facility until they're left with the 24th identity, the Beast. First off, this scenario might sound way too familiar to the Fun Times from Sister location and how they too abduct children at their birthday parties to then transport them to Afton's underground bunker. While as it sounds interesting, you do need to realize that Split was released in November 2016, which was over a month after Sister location, and I doubt that Scott had access to Split's plot before the movie's release. Anyways, one of the girls, Casey, is able to reach out to the Horde's true identity, Kevin, who reveals that he doesn't remember much, implying that he is unable to control himself from his disorder. Kevin's psychiatrist, Dr. Karen Fletcher, explains that people with split personality disorder not only creates personalities, but that they can actually develop unique psychological influence powers where their physical body and traits change to suit the dominant personality. Now to me, a lot of parallels screams the Mimic here. In FNAF, the Mimic was built by Edwin to specifically mimic his deceased son David, but as it goes, Edwin regrets it and doesn't react all that well to it, and thus beats the Mimic down. The Mimic then copies Edwin's violent behavior and goes on to become a ruthless killer, adopting various deceptive personalities to catch victims, everything from appearing, acting and mimicking the exact voices of someone else. Now, I don't think that the Horde from Split actually takes the personality from actual people just like the Mimic, and he is still not a literal machine, but they both have the ability to create and maintain different identities forever. I mean, the only identity that have been inspired by people around the Horde is the Beast. Its strange behavior inspired by the animals at the zoo he used to work in. Speaking of multiple identities, what is known about both the Mimic and the Horde is that they are both confused and don't know who they truly are. Like I mentioned earlier, once Kevin's consciousness comes back to life, he's confused and is quickly overtaken by the altars. Mirror that to the Mimic, who was originally built by Edwin to mimic David, but in the end just mimics anything it sees or hears. There are even more parallels as to their backstories and reasons for their strange and confused behaviors. You see, in the end of Split, we learn that Kevin Crumb came from a very traumatic childhood and that he had an abusive mother, which in turn caused a split personality disorder. Now mirror that to the Mimic, who was brutally beaten up by their creator Edwin, which in turn caused its strange and ruthless behavior.
Stop. You're not him. You're not! Stop sounding like him!
Now let's look at the colors tied to the two characters. In FNAF, it is assumed that everything that's colored in orange or yellow might be tied to the Mimic thanks to its orange eyes and how Helpy, or the Mimic from Ruin, disables and mixes with those strange orange particles. In the third movie of the Eastrail 177 trilogy, there is this poster of the three characters with their own colors. Like I said earlier, Dunn is tied to green, like Mike Schmidt, Mr. Glass in purple, just like Afton, but here we have this newly introduced villain to the trilogy, appearing in yellow just like the Mimic. I know that the third movie, Glass, came out in 2019, which was after FNAF, but remember that the color codes of David Dunn and Mr. Glass were already introduced in Unbreakable from 2000, before FNAF. However, not the Horde's color though. as this color code was introduced in Glass after FNAF's release. So does this mean that it's not a source of inspiration for FNAF? Well, it can still be a source of inspiration for the Mimic itself. You see, the Mimic first appeared in its own little short story in the Tales from the Pizzaplex book Nexi, released on May 2nd, 2023. So again, this is another potential inspiration source for FNAF coming from a movie released almost 7 years earlier. What's so fascinating about this connection between the Horde's and the Mimic's story is that once the director of the Eastrail trilogy, Shyamalan, decided to tie Unbreakable to Split, making it a thematic sequel, also decided to change some parts from Unbreakable that could line up with Split while not actually doing a retcon. For example, there's one scene where David Dunn bumps into this mother with her son. Well, once Split released and introduced Kevin Crumb, aka the Horde, to the series, this kid from this one scene 15 years ago suddenly turns out to be young Kevin with his abusive mother. The train that David Dunn survives, well, in Glass it is revealed that it was the same train that killed Kevin Crumb's father, Clarence. This type of rewriting is also shown in the FNAF series, and how its current Mimic story enables small details from previous games that at first glance didn't matter much to become another full story. Two separate stories eventually coming together at the end or later on in the franchise. Although it's not rare that a director or creator of a franchise tend to leave loose ends in the beginning to later expand upon those in the future, but still there are a lot of similarities and parallels between the Horde and its multiple identities with the Mimic and its mimicking of different people. Now, there is one interesting connection that I'm not sure to actually be another inspiration to FNAF, but I wanted to mention it anyway. In Split, Casey turns out to be the only one of the 3 girls to escape the Horde's underground facility, but once she makes it out alive, it's not a good ending. We learn that her father died of a heart attack and that her abusive Uncle John took over the custody. So once she is outside, she is not ready to go home. She doesn't want to go home since she knows that her uncle will still be abusive no matter what. She even explains to the Horde that she willingly gets detention in school in order for her to stay away from her uncle as long as possible.
I get into trouble at school on purpose so I can get sent to detention to get away from everyone so that I can be alone.
Now, Gregory from Security Breach is also trapped. Not in an underground facility though, but after hours of struggling is able to make it out alive. But once he gets out, he is alone and has nowhere to go. And even if he had somewhere to go, he clearly doesn't want to, just like Casey, who doesn't want to go home. Again, I'm not sure if this might be the case, and this scene where Gregory is left alone outside the Pizzaplex is one of multiple endings in Security Breach. That is, the bad ending. Now, it almost feels like I can go on and on with more potential parallels, but I wanted to focus on these 3 characters of David Dunn, Mr. Glass, and the Horde, and how they are sharing interesting connections to Mike, William, and the Mimic. You can still leave a comment if you happen to find more interesting connections between the Eastrail trilogy to FNAF, but to summarize this video, I believe that parts of the Eastrail trilogy, that is, the characters of David Dunn, Mr. Glass, and the Horde, were heavily or partially inspired for the FNAF characters, Mike Schmidt, William Afton, and the Mimic. David Dunn and Mike Schmidt are both protagonists, works as security guards, are both almost unbreakable or immortal, have one weakness each, returns decades later to fight off their arch-nemesis, and can appear in the color of green. Elijah Price, aka Mr. Glass, and William Afton are both antagonists, have the same type of social status, appears in wheelchairs, and are strongly tied to the color of purple. Kevin Crumb, aka the Horde, and the Mimic can have multiple personalities. They are both confused and don't know their true identity, both suffered from abuse in the past, which caused their malfunction or disorder, loosely introduced in the beginning of their franchises, and appears in the colors of yellow. Sure, anything can be an inspiration to FNAF if you're looking at other franchises, but the fact that all of these 3 characters from both the Eastrail 177 trilogy and the FNAF franchises shares a lot of similarities and parallels makes it so hard to dismiss. Now, even if you don't believe that some parts, if not all of this, are the source of inspiration to the parts of the FNAF story, then at least it's a fun coincidence that is hard to dismiss. Remember that this is just a theory, and feel completely free to disagree. I'm not saying that Scott really was inspired by Unbreakable once writing the FNAF story. It's just me theorizing it to be the case. That's also not to say that everything in FNAF was from Unbreakable. Definitely not. Only parts of it were inspired. The MCI, Charlie's death, etc. are definitely original and clearly not inspired by the Eastrail trilogy. These 2 franchises are not 100% the same. It's all just about a source of inspiration. But what do you think? Leave a comment down below if you want to share your thoughts and theories. Don't forget to share this video, like it, and if even better, subscribe. That's it for me. Thanks for listening.